So I've been doing something that's quite rare for me these days, watching Doctor Who. Preparation for the return of David Tennant and Russell T Davies has prompted a very overdue rewatch of the early episodes of the revived series, and I've come away from them with quite a terrifying conclusion. 2005 was fucking ages ago. Not only does it really feel like it's from the past, it also means that when you choose to start with Series 1, it puts a daunting amount of Doctor Who ahead of you. So when my friend, who's never seen a single episode, recently asked me where to start if she was interested in preparing for the new stuff, I drew a blank. For years I've considered Rose the best and only reasonable starting point for someone looking to get into the show, but now I'm not so sure. That being said, I don't think any attempt at a starting point since then has really come close. So now, 13 series and nearly 20 years on, I think it's time for another Rose. And I'd like to dive into why. I'd like to clarify I mean Rose the episode rather than the lady, but if you're in the market for another character called Rose, you're also in luck. I guess before we start, it's worth asking whether Doctor Who is a show that needs jumping on points at all. One of the benefits of the show's format is that you can tune into most episodes with no context and still enjoy the story. So much of the show's appeal, and a reason it survived so long, is that the setup is so beautifully simple. There's a new adventure every week. It always shocks people when I tell them that my first episode was Asylum of the Daleks, but I kept watching. Loads of Doctor Who fans will recall that their first memories of the show were something random and mid-series, especially if they started watching when they were a kid. But this kind of introduction doesn't really exist like it used to, or at least not to the same extent. It works when people are surfing channels and finding something to watch in the living room, but in the age of streaming it's quite hard to convince someone that it's okay to just tune in with a random episode in the middle of the 14th series. As fans, we know it's mostly fine, but there aren't many other shows where that wouldn't be a ridiculous thing to do, so it makes sense why people would be hesitant. I think it would also be dishonest to pretend that just because most episodes are broadly disconnected, that they're entirely standalone. The show is full of serialized drama. Character arcs, story arcs, Genesis arcs. Just because we go to a new location every episode doesn't mean a lot of stuff doesn't carry over from week to week. In some instances, it's fine to have a character show up and say, "Ah, Doctor, it is I, Skongo, and we're all so familiar with our relationship that I won't even bother explaining it." As a new audience member, you didn't know him before, but you do now. And next time Skongo shows up, you can go, "Oh, that's him from last time." But it usually doesn't take long for someone to show up or for something to happen that makes you feel like you've missed some required reading. And that can be pretty alienating, especially when that character and their relationships become the foundation for some major emotional moments. That happened to me a bit when I started with Series 7. I did feel the need to go back and do some homework to get all caught up. There were a few points I tried starting from, the most embarrassing being The Next Doctor because I assumed it was Matt Smith's first episode and that the name wasn't just there to trick me. But it wasn't until I bit the bullet and went all the way back to Series 1, Episode 1 that I really felt secure. Because Rose is just the perfect introduction. We take it for granted now, but the idea of everything being shown from the companion's perspective is just phenomenal. We never see the Doctor outside of her experiences with him, so he's shrouded in so much more mystery than if we'd just seen him arrive in the TARDIS ready to foil the baddie's plan. This makes the whole story so intriguing and engaging, but it also means that there's nothing you need to know before going in. The companion has always been there to ask the questions that the audience needs to know, but Rose's role as the audience insert is taken to a really effective extreme. She learns everything at the same time we do. Because this Doctor has never existed, the whole context we find him in following the Time War is brand new. Having knowledge of the classic series may enrich your enjoyment, but never your understanding. Because if there's something you need to know, Rose needs to know it too. Although we do start to follow the Doctor as a second protagonist in later episodes, Rose continues to be the lens through which we learn about the core elements of the series. And those elements are worked through with remarkable efficiency. We get Doctor, Sonic Screwdriver, TARDIS, Time Lord, future, past, Daleks in quick succession like a checklist. Every time a concept is reintroduced, it's written in a way that feels like it could be its first appearance, like this is the start of a brand new show. And that's something that doesn't really change for the whole era. There's a remarkably accessible approach to everything that means you never feel like there's stuff you haven't seen, even when there is. Now I'm sure some of you are rushing to the comments section right now, and not just to say that you like my haircut, but because on the surface there's a hole in my argument. Here I am saying Rose and Series 1 are all you need, but then one series later, along comes a classic character from the classic series with the same actor, directly continuing her story from 1976. But put that comment on hold because not only do you not need to have seen her history with the Doctor for the episode to work, I'd honestly go as far as to argue that it works better if you haven't, or at least if you don't really remember it. Obviously, there's joy and nostalgia in meeting Sarah after all this time if you do know her, but she has almost been turned into a stand-in for classic Who companions as a concept. They pair her with some other classic iconography that she's rarely had anything to do with. They imply that her travels ended thanks to the Time War, and in something that feels very specifically in service of New Who's dynamic, they make her relationship with the Doctor seem a bit more romantic than it ever actually was. It remains a very Rose-centric story. Just as we've introduced her to the TARDIS and to time travel, this is an introduction to the idea that she isn't the first person the Doctor has travelled with, that his Doctor Who life began far before hers and is likely to continue beyond it, which is vital to the story of Series 2. It worked so well for new audiences that they trusted Sarah Jane, a companion from the 70s, to lead a spin-off aimed at children from the 2000s. I doubt there were many Sarah Jane Adventures fans that had seen her time with Pertwee and Baker. There were even some who hadn't seen her time with David Tennant. Something very similar to School Reunion is done when we get the surprise master reveal in Series 3. There seems to have been a real effort to have the weight of that moment be felt even if you didn't know the character before. It works as a direct subversion to the new series idea that the Doctor is the last of the Time Lords, and that's impactful enough purely based on what we've been told. The only thing that's required to enjoy the RTD era is, in my eyes, the rest of the RTD era, but I do think you need the whole thing. That, I guess, brings me nicely to the other potential jumping on points across the show, and why I think they all fall short. I think I'm going to disregard the idea of diving in with a random episode like Blink or Heaven Sent, not because I don't think fun can be had, but because it doesn't feel like starting the series to me. It's maybe a standalone taste of what the show can be, but with something so fundamentally episodic, that's only so useful. At a certain point, you need to start somewhere that is more of a start. People used to just skip right past the 9th Doctor, which I guess makes sense if you don't know much about the show. I want to watch Tennant, so I'll start with Tennant. It's understandable, though I would say it's not advisable. Despite the new Doctor, Series 2 is not a Series 1. Christmas Invasion has always been more of a transition than an introduction, and Rose, the all-important audience insert that she is, knows so much by the time we join her with Tennant. Her presence in Series 2 and 4, and the huge rose-shaped shadow that looms over Series 3 makes her introductory series feel pretty vital to getting the most out of the entire era. And that's before we even get into Jackie, Captain Jack, Mickey, Captain Mick, and Pete. I'm sure I'll get comments telling me they started with Series 3 and had a lovely time, and I'm sure you did. But I guess what I'm looking for in this video is the ideal way to start. As much as you may have loved what you saw when you saw it, can you honestly argue that your enjoyment of Captain Jack's return, or of Stolen Earth, wouldn't have been improved by a bit more background info? Because I think it would have. Of course, back then, that wasn't such a huge ask. Oh, Series 4 is starting, let me just catch up on the first 3. That feels like something a normal person might say. But, oh, Series 14 is starting, let me just hop back and watch 13 series of a show I don't know I'll like. That feels like a harder commitment to make. So, if you want to start later in the show, how about the first change in showrunner? 11th Hour itself is pretty good. Seeing the regeneration process and the meeting of Amelia through the eyes of the Doctor makes it a really fresh entry after the last 2 companion-driven Doctor introductions. I guess that's me praising it as a Series 5 rather than a Series 1, but that's fine because it is a Series 5. But as it's the start of the Moffat era, let's look at it as also a kind of Series 1. There's not quite the same sense of slow build-up to understanding the Doctor, but Matt Smith is just so instantly good in such an accessible way that you don't need the mystery to be engaged with this character. You still have Amy as a bit of an entrance point, although her childhood idolization of the Doctor almost makes her a better stand-in for fans of the Russell T Davies era than for new viewers. Having the hero of your youth show up and whisk you away is pure fan fantasy, but I'd say it still works. We do the Rose Tyler checklist, she goes to the future, then to the past, we're all caught up. That is, until River comes along. Because unfortunately, River's first appearance in David Tennant's final series is probably her most important. Her death is just this inevitability that hangs over her time with both Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi. It's done so effectively that I think an audience member meeting her for the first time in Series 5 would be a real mistake, especially as her importance and presence increases. Series 6 is another Series 2 situation, but 100 times more alienating. Series 7, we've already said, I was more lost than I'd have liked to be. Series 8 gives us a new Doctor, but thanks to the presence of Clara and the gang, it's another episode that's way more focused on transition than introduction. It's about Clara coming to terms with the change, rather than anyone meeting the Doctor. Then, by the end of that series, we're given a new Master, but there's no time spent sitting down and explaining what her deal is, so I hope you've seen the Sim episodes. Clara continues in Series 9, and it's not until she leaves that the 12th Doctor really gets his first jumping on point. That being said, it probably is the closest we've come to Rose as far as effective episode 1s go. Its name is even a pun in reference to that. The The pilot throws us right in, with Bill Potts being taken on by an eccentric teacher from the university she works at. Through their very first conversation, we learn how long the Doctor's been working there and why he wants to take Bill as his student. Over the course of the episode, we learn about his TARDIS, his assistant Nardole, and his role guarding a mysterious vault under the uni. Again, this is practically all seen through her perspective as an outsider. The show has a new status quo, and the different vibe feels fresh and fun in a way that makes a nice change after 3 series of Clara, or makes a nice introduction if this is where you've started. We know the drill by now. They go to the future, they go to the past, and finally, it feels like we're all caught up. Missy's in the vault. Yeah, Series 10 still has some baggage, whether that's just the small-scale emotional beat of losing Clara, or the big lore things that make up the foundation of this whole new status quo. On the other hand, Bill doesn't know Missy, so the whole scenario is explained to her and so to any new audience members. In that way, they probably do a better job explaining her in Series 10 than they do in Series 8. On the other hand, Missy's redemption is something that works a lot better when you've seen her as an evil murderer, especially when the epitome of evil murderer master crosses the showrunner divide to challenge Missy's turn to the light side. That all being said, it's still possible that Series 10 will work for you as a starting point. I honestly think of all the series since the first, it probably has the best chance of keeping you entertained without making you feel left out. But if the few holdouts from previous series don't bother you and you end up having an amazing time, I think there's another problem. Surprising, I know. Because Series 10 is almost the promise of a Doctor Who reboot that doesn't exist. We have the university as a base, Nardole as the assistant, Missy hanging about as a reformed or reforming evildoer. It's a really cool little setup. And then it's over. It's like, okay, we found a brand new status quo and a fresh formula that's fun and could last for 5 whole seasons. Okay, you've had a dozen episodes, that's enough, goodbye. Get ready for a brand new cast and a brand new showrunner. I think Series 10 is great, but there's not quite enough of it for it to be satisfying as your first. So to recap, if you want to enjoy Series 10, you should probably have seen Series 8. But to really enjoy Series 8, you should probably already know Clara, so go back to Series 7 to meet her. Series 7 has Amy, Rory and River, so maybe get to know them in Series 5. No, 4. Okay, well not 4 because you'll probably be a bit confused, so maybe it's best you just go back to Series 1. I hope you see my point. If only someone could come along and give us a standalone series of Doctor Who. Wow, I don't know how he did it, but it seems like Chris Chibnall has given me everything I've ever wanted. The Woman Who Fell to Earth ticks every box. We see the events and meet the Doctor through the many eyes of the many companions. We gradually get introduced to the concept of the series in the formula we've come to expect, but it's not interrupted by an episode that hinges on something from 4 years ago that you feel like you should have seen. It builds solely on the ideas that it's already introduced. Plus, this fresh change in vibe marks the beginning of a whole era rather than just one series, so it's not over-promising what's to come. It seems that Chris Chibnall set out on a mission for Series 11, saying there's genuinely nothing you need to have watched in order to enjoy yourself. It doesn't matter if you've seen every episode of Doctor Who or no episodes of Doctor Who. You can all sit down on a Sunday night, tune in, and be equally bored by the shite he sends your way. No, that's mean. It's mean and it's too easy. There are definitely people that like the Chibnall era, so let's try and be fair and judge how it works as an introduction. I think on paper it does a decent job based on the criteria I'm looking for. Sure, familiar characters begin to pop up, and the plot dips a bit more into complex lore as the era progresses, but most of it is done in a way that keeps you up to date on what you really need to know. Prerequisite knowledge is rarely the basis of any major beat, and that's definitely good. The trouble is, I don't think the episodes are very good. I don't like them very much at all. This is obviously where my opinion starts to come in and shape the argument a little, but if you wanted objectivity, you shouldn't have clicked on a YouTube channel named after a single guy. If I'm being honest, I don't think it's just that Series 11 isn't for me. I simply don't have much faith in its ability to turn people into fans. I'm sure it's happened, but I don't know if I'd want to rely on it. I feel like Jodie takes a while to truly find her footing, and these 3 chuckleheads amount to about half the character that Rose Tyler was. I had a number of friends who started with The Woman Who Fell to Earth, had a pretty good time, and then dropped off fairly quickly into the series. The stories just don't hook you as much as I feel they really need to. Even if you do keep watching, I think that by starting with Series 11, you're missing out on how good the show can really be. I'm honestly not interested in sitting here and lamenting the fact that Doctor Who was irrevocably ruined by Chris Chibnall. We've all had enough of that. But at the very least, I think it sells the concept of the show quite short. Some of you might totally disagree, and that's great. If you think this is the perfect place to start, then hooray, we've found our new Series 1. But if it's all the same to you, I'm going to keep looking. Unfortunately, there's nowhere else to look, so let's talk about the future. It seems like we're set for Russell T Davies' self-indulgent trip down a 2008 memory lane for the 60th anniversary, so I think we can probably discount that as a place to start. I might be wrong, it could be the perfect place to start. It is the beginning of the show's time on Disney Plus after all, but to me it makes way more sense for the new era to be marked by the start of Ncuti Gatwa. Despite what some David Tennant fans will tell you, the world is eagerly awaiting the 15th Doctor. If social media engagement is anything to go by, more so than the 14th Doctor. He has people excited, people who haven't even seen Doctor Who. They want to tune in and see what the show is all about, and I think they should be able to have just as amazing a time as we will. The slightly tricky thing is that he seems like he's going to be making his debut in the aforementioned 2008 Memory Lane specials. Ideally, that appearance will be an exciting teaser for what's to come, but it won't be too vital an introduction for the character. Because it would be great if the real start of his era, the upcoming Christmas special, could be the perfect starting point for new fans. We know it'll lead into Series 14, we know that that's when we're going to meet Millie Gibson's Ruby Sunday, and very excitingly, we don't know anything else about what to expect. But what I really truly hope is that it, and everything that follows, is able to stand on its own feet. I'm not looking for a series of Doctor Who that totally disregards the past. The show's rich history is one of the reasons why it's so great, but there are ways to draw upon that history without alienating those who are new. Ways to make reintroductions just feel like introductions for those who aren't in the know. Because as a fan of the series, I would love if there was something I could point to and say, here's the new beginning, you can hop on and have a spectacular time with no caveats. Ideally, it would then be followed by something that's spectacular, but I'm very hopeful that it will be. There was talk of calling Ncuti's first series the season 1 of a more explicit reboot or revival, and while I don't think that's a terrible idea, I'm also not sure that it needs to go that far. It's possible to provide both a satisfying continuation and a fresh start. I mean, Russell's done it before. I suppose therein lies a potential problem. Sorry for saying therein. RTD is back, and I'm saying how great it would be for him to do the same thing he did 20 years ago, but with a new 19-year-old blonde companion. That feels like the exact sort of stagnating that we're worried about with a returning showrunner, but I think there's a way to do something just as effective as Rose without just doing Rose again. I like to think that it would bore Russell to just repeat himself, but I don't claim to know the man. He may think that a little bit of repetition is necessary for the sake of reaching a broad new audience, and he may be right, but the last time he made an episode 1, the show had been off the air for a significant amount of time. It'll be interesting to see how he juggles accessibility with continuity, because it's got to be possible. I would love us to push forward into new territory in a way that achieves everything a Doctor Who starting point needs, while also satisfying fans that have been watching for longer. It's not like these semi-introductory episodes that we've had over the years are a necessity that existing fans have to stomach until we get back to the good stuff. Rose is really good. 11th Hour is really good. The pilot is really good. If something like this works, it works for everyone. The best case scenario is that new viewers become fully converted Doctor Who fans, in a way that makes them want to go and see what previous series have to offer, just as fans of New Who did with the classic era. If they're doing it out of love for the show rather than just obligation, the fact there's loads to get through will become less daunting and more exciting. You still might not think this is a very important thing for the show to worry about. As Doctor Who fans, we can sometimes forget that not everyone cares as deeply for the show as we do, but I know there are people who are put off the show as soon as something happens that makes them feel like they have to do homework. But there are going to be loads of new eyes on the show over the next year, and there's an opportunity to keep them there and inspire even more people to start without fear of alienation. I think it would be really cool if the show took that opportunity. But I'd love to know what you guys think. Have I been horribly unfair to your go-to recommendation for a starting point? Maybe I have been. For the sake of the argument, I've been looking for a standard of perfection that's maybe a little optimistic, but it's because I feel it really can be done. I'd love to know your thoughts either way. Maybe also tell me what episode you started with. I appreciate you all for watching, especially if you've stuck around for this long. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Actually do subscribe, because I'm back to making regular videos about Doctor Who and all kinds of other things. So let me know if there are any topics you feel I should cover, and maybe how you'd like me to approach talking about the 60th on this channel. I hope you're all doing well, by the way. It's been a very long time, but it won't be that long again, hopefully ever. I'll see you very soon. Love you lots.